Um, Welcome, Melissa McGill. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's get started, if that's all right with you.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah,
Uh,
thank you.
so I'd like to go back all the way back to the beginning. Will you tell us about when you were, a kid, and like when you first started to encounter art and become connected with art, and just give us a little bit of that story, if you would.
Yeah, so I grew up in upstate New York, the Catskill Mountains, and my siblings and I'm the youngest of six kids, and we kind of always make a joke that we were raised by wolves. So, our parents were very hands off. You were supposed to entertain yourself, and there was always a lot of art supplies around. Both my parents were creative. My grandfather was a painter. Uh, but he died when I was pretty young, so I didn't really learn anything from him. But my aunt had a costume business. Her daughter runs it now, still does costumes for off-Broadway shows and things like that. So a lot of creativity everywhere. It was never, I don't think I thought about being an artist as far as making a living until probably around high school, you know. But everyone encouraged me to do academics because that was, a safe route, and
Oh yeah.
I was comfortable with it. I was a good student, and I got really high SAT scores. So everyone said, this is what you should do. And yeah, so I went to college for 4 years, and then I left, and I got a job as a photographer at a little newspaper. Like something completely unrelated to what I went to college for.
Of course.
Yeah, but so yeah, I was just always making things,
Yeah.
always, like, all the time. Yeah.
Well, I followed a similar path. I loved art. I went to a high school for the arts. I actually studied theater, but I always loved visual arts.
Yeah.
And when I went to college, I didn't feel a big push, but I did definitely have that. I wanted to take the safe route. I didn't feel confident enough to like go for it. I talk about that with my students, just how that's daunting, but really feasible. More as I've gotten older, I've seen more and more like, oh, I could have. It was easy then to fall on your face or to give it a go like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I didn't move into fine art until probably, it's about 5 years ago now. I
Okay.
always worked as a commercial artist. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I only really started trying to market myself as an artist and about 5 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And will you talk a little bit about the commercial art that you made? And like, so you said you were a photographer for a newspaper, and then what was the path from there?
Yeah, I was a photographer for a little artsy newspaper, the Woodstock Times, and I did literally photo essays on doorknobs. I mean, it was a really goofy photography job. It was kind of great. And I left there and I went to a big Gannett paper. They're like a huge chain. They own USA Today and all that. And I kind of missed doing a lot of the darkroom stuff I did, which was making my own paper and doing sandwich negatives, multiple exposures in the darkroom. But then I discovered Photoshop, which was
Oh,
kind of this, mind-blowing thing for me at the time. And I started combining paint and imagery digitally. That was,
okay.
and then I realized there was a market for that, for magazines and advertising. And so I made up a portfolio and I just started going into Manhattan and dropping off my portfolio. I think I had a certain amount of why not, and in retrospect, had I not been naive enough, I probably wouldn't have done it. You know what I mean? Like, I would have had a lot of reasons not to do that
Yeah.
because a lot of people have said to me, oh, that was very brave or whatever. And I'm like, it wasn't really. It was just, I've always kind of thought, well, what's the worst that can happen? They could say no, and I think that has been the thing that has allowed me to have a career in the arts, that kind of just fling yourself out there and
Yeah.
see what happens. You know what I mean? So yeah.
That I think that that what's the worst can happen mindset is really a great mindset to have, especially in the art world.
Yeah, you really have to try. You have to be self-motivated. You have to, I mean, there is a certain amount of listening to criticism, but that's valuable, but you can't internalize it. You, you know what I mean? You have to have a little bit of a wall there. And um, yeah, really, what's the worst thing that could happen? You didn't have the job before you asked for it. So, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of the perspective I had. So.
I think a lot of times too there are a lot of people that don't know what they're missing until you present it to them, and so I think putting yourself out there in that way oftentimes kind of they didn't ask for it, but they also didn't realize oh, well, this thing is really great, like this thing that you're offering is so I think there's
Yeah, I think too, especially in the arts, people have been trained to believe that you're just they're by buying your art or hiring you, they're giving you a gift, you
yeah,
know. And um, okay, but they're making money off of you, and they want to work with people they can make money off of. You, you know what I mean? It is a commercial enterprise.
yeah,
So if they can see that you're going to perform well for them, whatever that those parameters are, they'll probably hire you or buy your art or, so it's kind of there is a certain amount of marketing involved, even in getting a job. Anywhere you go, you have to be able to market yourself. That's what your resume is,
yeah, yeah.
you know, and for an artist, that's what your portfolio is. And, so that does play into it, but yeah, you just got to put yourself out there, I think.
So then you worked for the Jeanette, and you learned about Photoshop and kind of started working with Photoshop. And did you did the path change from there, or we continue that story?
Yeah, so I was a commercial illustrator for a very long time, probably about 17 years. And I worked on my own stuff on the side. I did a lot of photo collage work, and I always, I did silk screening and all different kinds of printing and painting. And, I just like to learn things.
Yeah,
So, and then I would learn something and I'd incorporate it into my work somehow. Um, and I worked for I worked at very large ad agencies in New York, BBDO, and we worked on these paper products promotions, which I don't know if your students have any access to them, but even if you look online, they use beautiful artwork in them to highlight how their paper works for printing. And, so that was kind of my introduction to the idea that there was a fine art element to commercial art. Like you don't really think about it that way, but it exists. And then I kind of saw that I could straddle these two things and have an income and also create things that when you're a commercial artist, you're telling someone else's story. And
yeah.
that's the difference between that and fine art. Fine art is your story, So, yeah. So, and then that sort of transitioned me into, for years, everyone told me, oh, you should paint, or you should do this, or you should do that. And I kind of went, all right, I'll give this a go, and yeah, so that's what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is it full time?
It is full time. So basically, about 80% of my time is spent marketing my work and finding new outlets for my work, and about 20% of my time is spent actually painting. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah,
Uh, so but it was like that before as well, and even I've worked with a couple of galleries on and off, but um, it, I feel a little more comfortable holding the reins for my career myself.
yes,
Um, so, and now with COVID, it's a whole different world. So I'm sort of set up, most of my outlets are online anyway.
yeah.
And the thing that is kind of a game changer for me is there's no art fairs right now,
Oh, yes.
which was a big part of my, making sales. So
Yeah.
that's a little weird. I'm trying to figure that out, but Yeah.
How many art fairs would you say you would typically have done in a year?
I do between 4 and 6 fairs, and they're pretty large fairs. I mean, I started out doing one because they're kind of expensive to do.
Yeah.
And the first one was really unnerving. Like, it's this huge investment. You don't really know what's going to happen. But I learned a lot, and I definitely learned how to talk about my work.
Oh yeah.
Because you have thousands of people walking through and asking you questions, and so that was a really great experience. And then I just moved into, the next year I did 2, and then the next year I did 4, and you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that was the route. Yeah.
Do you enjoy that process? I did that for some years before I came back into teaching, and they were smaller fairs, but I always enjoyed uh, hearing direct feedback like right away. I mean, there were some days where I didn't enjoy it so much, uh, but it was just nice to have people respond to my work, and I could witness it. And
Yeah, in general, everyone's very positive. I've never had someone troll me at an art fair.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I mean, I do enjoy it. I My favorite part is not so much speaking to people, but watching their face as they're looking at my work. That's kind of interesting. And I feel like I've really made a connection.
yeah,
Um, and that's important to me because I really feel like even though these are very abstract, I want them to speak to people, and just whatever emotions they evoke from that person, uh, that's a reward, so it's really nice to see because you're kind of just, I'm just in my studio and I don't
yeah.
really, I
Oh yeah,
just, so it's kind of great, to see it touch people. That's
yeah.
pretty, yeah.
We spoke about this just a little bit before, but will you speak to that? I feel like it to me when I imagine it, it must be difficult to be an abstract artist, to make a go of making these things that for some people, I feel like I've been in galleries and heard it before, like, oh, a child could do that, or so will you talk about like making that leap, or was there bravery involved, or
Yeah, no, it was more kind of, well, first of all, I didn't imagine that I was going to do it professionally. I sort of started, I've always really loved abstract art. I grew up in New York, and on weekends I would go to MoMA and I would spend the entire day there. I would take the bus to the city and just spend the whole day there. And I've always loved abstract art. And anytime I had tried to create something, it was really garbage. It was really not a great painting. And um, the thing that kind of allowed me, I think I mentioned this to you, I probably made about 100 paintings that were just thrown away. And then I finally made something that felt good. It felt like, oh, I meant that, like,
yes,
yeah, that makes sense. And I look at it now and it wasn't very good, but at that point in time, it was an accomplishment for me. But when I started thinking about it more as design as opposed to painting, I was able to make paintings. And I don't know if that's because that's my background, is in, illustration and design and something a little more tangible. But when I tried just pulling things out of the air, it didn't go very well. That was a really hard thing for me to do. So, and then you move into this whole thing of like color value and composition and how color value affects your composition. And it's almost like there's so many options, you don't know where to go,
yeah.
and you can very easily go too far. And so for that, I usually work on probably about 10 paintings at the same time
Oh, okay.
because it slows me down a little bit, because once I get a hold of the paint, I'm very much like a little kid again. I just like watching it spread around, and yeah, so I work on a lot of pieces at the same time, and about half of them make it to, oh, I would put this in a gallery, or a lot of them get thrown away.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
And when you were starting, this is just, well, and I guess it's kind of in general. first of when you were starting to make the abstract pieces, were you working on a smaller scale, or were you working on, and then do you have a preference of the scale that you like to work at, or?
Um, I was working on a smaller scale for financial
Yeah,
reasons. You know,
yeah.
it's a bit of an investment. And I started, I think I bought like a bunch of, like a box of paint that has like 12 colors in it or something, you know, Liquitex or Blick or something. And I just started playing, and I initially got really lost in mixing color because I really didn't like the colors in that little box, you know. Um, so yeah, I did start working small. It's hard to go from small pieces to large pieces because compositions don't necessarily translate well.
Yeah.
It is a different way of looking at work. I do like making very large paintings because they just take over your visual field. So you're completely immersed in this world, whatever it is, you know, you can just get really lost in it. But in the same token, I do like doing things that are really tiny for the same purpose, because it's kind of like, it just sort of encapsulates a little moment, you know.
And
So yeah.
that notion too, I feel like of then you're drawn in, like when with a small piece like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So now I have, you know, shipping issues. Like,
Oh yeah.
I mean, and that's actually something you have to think about. So sometimes I'll make very large paintings and I won't stretch them
Oh,
because I can roll it, and somebody will stretch it on the other end, you know, usually. So there are, you know, pragmatic issues with making certain things, but um, I don't actually have a preference, to tell you the truth. It
that's
just
cool.
depends what's there, and, you know, that's the only preference I have.
Like frame of mind for the moment, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Will you take us through like let's say that you've got, 9 pieces of blank canvas.
Uh-huh.
Will you take us through a little bit and talk maybe a little bit about, because I feel like, do you use spray paint sometimes? And
Yeah, I use whatever seems to work for wherever I'm going, which I don't always have a clear concept of that. Um, so I I don't I kind of start with a batch of colors. I start with a palette that I want to use, not for a specific purpose. I just really like those colors at that moment. And then I start trying to figure out how to make that composition work with those colors. And I do often fall back to these deep blues because they serve this wonderful purpose of grounding the painting, and they're a great contrast. You know, the value of the deep blue is really wonderful, but it doesn't overpower you like black would, or something, you know what I mean?
yes,
Um, and then my primary focus is getting a lot of texture. Like, so I don't really go for flat areas in my work. I like a lot of texture. So sometimes I do these pours onto the surface, and then I'm working with big squeegees and things like that. And then I will flip the painting over. So now I'm painting on the side that bled through, because it gives me an irregularity that I wouldn't be able to get had I tried to get that. Like if I try to get it, it always looks sort of forced.
yeah,
And, you know, so, and that was kind of a happy accident. I was trying for this certain thing and it wasn't working, and I just kept pouring water on the canvas. Yeah, so, and also I work on raw canvas. There's no gesso on there. So things bleed through. It's almost like a dyeing process initially,
yeah.
you know, to think of it that way. So things bleed through the canvas, and then you start to get these beautiful textures on the other side. And then I build up from there. I'm trying to bring your eye around, and it's the composition and form I'm looking for from that point on, so yeah.
Would you say I talk with my students sometimes about balance as well, like when you're thinking about composition, and I always talk to my students and say I feel like as a teacher, balance is one of the hardest things to teach. Do you?
Yeah, so you guys probably do the tic-tac-toe thing. Did you?
Oh, yeah, I've used that before. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of like so there's a thing in design of working on a grid, which is very similar to the tic-tac-toe board, you know, and then there's also how do eyes move around things, you know. So they've done all these studies about how people look at anything, the world, and we go naturally in these triangles,
Yeah.
which is where that grid comes from. Like, you probably know all this, but anyway, I do kind of think about that. But a lot of times, initially when I first started painting, there was a lot of thought about that. And then I started getting a little irritated with doing it conventionally. Like, I kind of feel, it's funny, we have a border collie who overthinks everything. And my husband always tells me I'm like the dog. But I don't want to do it in this sort of predictable way. So I have to try to figure out a way to bring that balance, but not have it be so obvious, because I feel like then that's a lot more interesting. So, you know, I want to have it, it has to be a little off to be interesting, I think. You know,
Yeah.
that's kind of my approach to it. You have to have something slightly unexpected, not so unexpected that it's horrific, but just enough so that you're still compelled to engage with it, to try
Yeah.
to figure it out, to sort it out mentally. So yeah, so I try to do that.
If it's all right with you, would you mind to talk about just a little bit of the money side, like how you think about pricing your work? And I just feel like that's such a difficult thing for artists. I talk about it with my students a lot, about how it's just, I don't feel like, I mean, I've heard of formulas and things like that, but I just feel like it's such a tricky thing to kind of nail down.
Yeah, so when I first started, I looked around at other artists who were at a similar point in their career as I was and were selling work, and what did they price their works at, you know. I do know that some people go like per square inch or per square foot, or this took me 9 hours to make, or this, you know, and I basically just kind of looked at what the market would allow. That was my approach to it. And then when I sell out a collection, I can raise my prices. Actually, once you get down to like 2 or 3 pieces left in a collection, you can, the standard is to raise your prices by 10%. And you should just raise your prices by 10% every year anyway.
Okay.
So it's kind of the way that people move into, you know, having a little more value for their time each year, you know, is like you give yourself a raise basically.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was the way it worked. I will occasionally run sales to generate interest, you know, but you can't do that too often. Otherwise your collectors get a little irritated, you know.
Sure.
you, you know, because they already have this piece and they believe it's a certain value.
Yeah.
If you lower the value of, you know, that lowers the value of the work you've already sold.
Yeah.
So, and on that note too, you don't want to go backwards pricing. So my approach has always been to be careful with raising my prices, because I don't want to have to step back. You know, I don't want to have to lower
Sure.
my prices. So yeah. And then there's, you know, larger galleries. I've had some contact me and say, oh, we'd love to rep you, but we have to like triple your prices. And I'm kind of like, well, then that means you're the only person who can sell my work, because my work sells for these prices in these places
Yeah.
and they don't have those kinds of collectors. So I haven't gone that route. I've said thank you and just, I'm good, you
Yeah.
know what
Yeah.
I mean? Because it sounds alluring. Oh, I could make $10,000, but that's an imaginary amount until you have it in your hand,
Yes.
you know. So, and I can't explain that for the electric bill, like, you know,
That's right.
that still has to be paid. So yeah, so I've always been a little careful with that, but I do sell prints of my work.
Yeah.
And that kind of appeases, you know, there's people who are in the, like an intro into the market, and they would like prints and they would, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And I do some licensing for like fabric design and things like that.
Oh, cool.
So I've kind of set it up to have multiple income streams to try to help with that feast or famine issue. And I learned that from being an illustrator.
Yeah.
Um, because I wasn't on staff anywhere. I was always freelance. And that can be a difficult way to, to live your life. So so at multiple income streams. So you look at, licensing and what can I do murals? I'm not really a muralist, but some people do that, and those are great opportunities. And I think that you have to, I think artists should go to business school,
Oh
actually.
yeah. Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, because if you're an artist, you're going to be an artist. Like it's
Yeah.
there, and it's just going to happen. I mean, you do need education, but I do think business school would be really useful.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Will you talk a little bit about the platforms that you use to sell your art, whether that's just your website or like I know you through Instagram. That's how I follow you, and that's how I was able to reach out to you. But are there other platforms that you use, or do you have like a main one? This is your central.
Yeah. Saatchi Art,
Oh,
Saatchi Online.
yeah.
And that's who I do most of my art fairs with as well. It's called the Other Art Fair. And it's a really great kind of, so they have this massive market presence, so it can be pretty easy to get lost in the sauce on their site. I'm lucky in that they promote me frequently and they've put me in their catalog. And so I don't get lost,
Yeah.
and I have a relationship, even though it's an online platform. I actually know the curators. I've met them at the fairs and we've spoken face to face. And so that's a very different kind of aspect to that particular platform. And then I'm also I'm on like a ton of them.
Yeah.
So I'm on Zetista, which is this other platform, and First Dibs, which is another one. And they also sell antiques and things like that, but they sell really high-end art. Like there's Rauschenbergs on there.
Oh wow.
Yes, it's a really interesting sort of online marketplace, a French marketplace called Singular, and they actually I sell work to Asia through them, which is also kind of interesting,
Yeah.
And what I've realized is that you kind of have to be more than one place,
Yeah.
because there's only so many artists they can put on their front page, and there's only, you know what I mean? So if you're just waiting for that one place to promote you, if you're lucky, they'll do it 3 times a year,
Yeah.
you know? So again, it's like my approach is to get my work to as many places as possible so that I can have a steady income stream.
Yeah.
Um,
I
because the other thing is, it's kind of hard to just keep creating paintings and not have anyone buy them. It's demoralizing, you
yeah.
know what I mean? So there is a feedback loop that happens there, as far as just being able to keep your stamina up and create. It's
I talk about it sometimes as I liken it to going fishing, and like the way you're describing it, it's like you've got all these fishing lines out,
yeah,
and you just never know. Like you're getting big one over here and a couple small ones over here, and then nibbles there. And,
yeah.
you just can't predict it. But the more you can have out, the more it sounds like.
Yeah, the more likely you are to make a sale. And also on the online platforms, you do have to upload something like every week. So they all work on algorithms,
Yeah.
like the whole world does now. And so the more activity they see on your page, the more likely they are to promote you. And part of that activity is you uploading and promoting yourself. And I've noticed a lot of artists aren't interested in promoting their online galleries. They would rather promote their own website, you know what I mean? Because you don't want to pay that percentage to the gallery, right?
Sure.
But I do both, and my perspective on it is they have a much larger reach than I do,
Yeah.
and they always will. Saatchi will always have a larger reach than I do, and I'm willing to give them their percentage for their reach.
Sure.
That kind of, I'm fine with that. So I don't know. It depends. I mean, there's other artists that have done very well just on Instagram. They're very happy with that kind of model. But Instagram is somewhat passive. It's like passive marketing in a way. And so I think it's part of a package for getting somewhere as an artist, but I don't think it's the only, again, this theme, right? Do as much as you can. You know what I mean? Like, just, you got to take care of the marketing and the, you know, that whole end of it if you want to sell things. It's just like,
Yeah.
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 Oh.
Are you, so are we in your studio with you there?
Yeah, yeah, this is where I work. I can't really move this too much. I can move it a little. You can see
Okay.
the chaos of the studio.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, really messy. I'm not really an organized art person, but
I always love that chaos.
yeah, I'm happy out here. It makes my family a little nutty because I'm like, walk careful where you're walking. You know, that's actual painting you're walking across. Because I work on the floor a lot,
Yeah.
you know, for the pours and everything. So yeah.
It looks like you have great natural light.
I do. I have these big windows here. We built this. I live in Las Vegas, so it's crazy sun here, right? But we put these windows in on the one wall, so it's the north side, so I can tolerate the sun in here. Yeah,
Yeah. Do
yeah.
you have any, are there any materials in particular or like brushes or you just kind of, is there anything that like, that's my favorite or?
Um, no, I usually work with things for a while. I use a lot of junk brushes, like those dollar brushes you get at the hardware store.
Yeah.
And I just wash them really good to begin with, so all the hairs that are going to fall out, you know. And most of my tools are here. Let me see. I have this, you know, bin of spreaders, and
Oh yeah.
you can see like squeegees and spreaders, and this thing that I cut to make liney textures. And this is actually sort of a favorite thing. I don't know if you can see in the light.
Is that a
It,
wire brush?
it is a wire brush.
Yeah.
And but as the paint, you know, when you do a pour with a thick viscosity paint, and then when it's almost dry, you kind of run this through it and you make really lovely textures. So I have this hardware store quality to my to my tools, you know. And
I love that too. The homemade tools. I always love, you know, where we've adapted and modified and, you know, making things work for what you're doing. I always like that.
yeah, yeah. So
I'm
yeah, and
gonna,
I use a lot of house paint too, like
okay.
latex house paint.
Were you
Um,
recently, did you recently do a collaboration with a company that makes paint or did I see
yeah,
that?
yeah, backdrop paint. Such beautiful colors. And yeah, which was very fun. You know, I contacted them and said, "Hey, I'd like to work with you," and they said yes. And the owner of the company just sent me a bunch of paint
Oh, wow.
and said, "Just send me the pictures when you're done. I'd love to support your work." So yeah, there are opportunities like that for people too, if you are brave enough to just ask the question.
That's
You know,
right. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
What's the
So
worst?
yeah.
I'm gonna jump into some of the questions from my students. So,
Yeah,
um, what is integral to the work of an artist?
what is integral? Uh, well, that's a really big question.
That's kind of
Uh,
heavy.
yeah, it is kind of heavy. Um, I think resilience, you know,
Yeah.
and of course creativity, but sort of like this collaboration with the world in you know, being able to see, I think, which is not as simple as it sounds, you
Yes.
know. And yeah, I think that that's important because there's so many different kinds of art. There's performing art and, you know, visual art, and it's always changing. There's so many different ways to be an artist. There's so many uh, different routes to take.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I do think resilience is a really important part of it. Yeah.
I like that. I feel like you've answered the second question they have here. What role do you think artists have in society? And I feel like what you said about helping people to see in a you know, but unless you want to add to that.
No, no, that's fine. Yeah, helping people to see, and also trying to see what people see. You know,
Yeah.
that the empathy that you can spread around. is kind of a great thing. And yeah.
What has been your most memorable moment as an artist?
My most memorable moment as an artist. Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I guess actually, when I first started trying to get work as a commercial artist, I went, into a lot of places, and I remember dropping off my portfolio at the mailroom for it was at the time it was Discover magazine, which I don't know if they're still around even, but and the people in the mailroom kind of were poking fun at me, like, oh, another artist dropping off their portfolio. And the art director was very standoffish. They were like, you leave it here and it'll be back in the mailroom at 4 o'clock. They don't even talk to you. It's not like an in-person thing. And then I was on my way back home on a train, and they called me on my cell phone. And the art director said, you're actually good. And it just sort of rang in my head. And it comes up quite a bit, this idea that he was surprised, the idea, and mostly because there are a lot of people who haven't really worked their craft, and they talk about how difficult it is to get somewhere, but they haven't really put the work in.
Yeah.
And if you put the work in, somebody's probably going to say, hey, you're actually good.
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? Like, so that has always rung in my head, like for years.
Well, and that's wonderful, because I talk with my students a lot, because I kind of run into that sometimes, where they're not so inclined to put the work in.
Yeah, well, I mean, in high school too, you don't really know what you want to do. Like, so I think it's kind of hard to, I don't know. But once you get serious about it, it is something you really have to work at every day.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
yeah.
It dawned on me, and I spoke about this year with my high school students, the notion of that a doctor refers to their work as a practice,
Yeah.
and a dentist refers to their work as a practice. And I never put that together, that what a practice is. It means that they go in and they practice medicine every day. And it's
Yeah.
like, as artists, that's what we have to do the same. We have to practice. We have to put in that work.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, you really do.
I'm sorry.
You do. Yeah.
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 Is there anything that you dislike about the art that you make? If so, what?
Oh, I really hate stretching canvases.
Oh yeah.
Like, I absolutely hate stretching canvases. Um, just mostly because I end up ripping them off so frequently. I would love to just go to the store and buy some pre-stretched stuff, but they don't make it the way I want to use it. So every once in a while I go back and I try to work on gessoed canvas, but I don't even know what to do with it anymore. Like everything, my techniques for what I do or don't apply to that
Yeah.
surface.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Is the artist lifestyle lonely?
Perhaps. I don't know. I mean, my husband's a musician,
Okay.
so I don't know. And I've worked not in an office and not with people for almost my entire adult life. So I don't know that I have anything to AB. You know
Sure.
what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
Um, but no, I don't think of it as lonely per se, but maybe because I just, until we all had to stay in our homes, I just go places. So it's not really, it's not like you're physically confined to
Yeah.
someplace. Yeah.
As an artist, what is the best piece of advice you've been given, or perhaps given to someone else?
Oh, I know. Work at it.
Yeah.
Like, work at it. Like, keep moving forward. And it's kind of interesting too, because I've done pieces that I thought were wonderful, and then like 2 years later, they don't stand up. You know what I mean? So there is that thing about just, you have to keep working at it. You have to keep evolving.
Do you think that holds? Because I have work very similar, work that I can remember creating, and I'm just like in love with it and so happy about it. And then I'll look at it a couple of years later, and it's like, It was,
Yeah, yeah,
do
yeah,
it's such an interesting, yeah, I don't know how to speak to that. I just find that interesting.
yeah.
Um, I think that's all that I have for you. Thank you so much.
All right, yeah, thank
Um,
you. Thanks for asking me, and hello to your students. Hope they're
I
all
really
well.
appreciate you sharing, and I love your work. I think it's wonderful. So thank you for sharing that too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh,
Thanks.
all right.